What's up, guys? It's John Dominique, the Soul Proponent. Before I start this video, I do want to piggyback off of where I left off on the previous video about hardening of the heart. There's some type of, the personality feels some type of way once it finds out about the soul. You can notice that it's going to run as far and as fast as it possibly can. It feels like it has its back up against the wall. It feels like it's a matter of life and death. It's trying to run and trying to hide as far and as fast as it possibly can away from God. This reaction does not come from God. It comes from the personality, from the enemy. Now, we need to have a lot of compassion for ourselves on this path of the soul, because it's very difficult, and the personality has its reactions and its opinions, and it feels a lot of hatred and a lot of anger when all of its supports are taken away from it. It feels like it's going to lose everything. So we have to be very patient, and we need to be able to allow ourselves to have those feelings of anger and the feeling of needing to run away as far and as fast as we can and having its back up against the wall. It's going to feel stuck in those feelings for quite a long time, but just know that those feelings are normal, and that's what happens on the path to the soul. That's just the beginning process, and it's going to happen more and more. If you stay with those feelings, you'll notice, if you're careful, that after those feelings are gone, you're going to feel a little bit spacious. You're going to feel a little bit more expansive. You're going to feel a little bit more calm inside yourself. And if you just stay with those feelings more and more, you're going to start to crave that feeling of contraction. It's like a muscle. When you go to the gym, you're working out, it almost hurts. But when you're done, you're going to notice that you're a little bit more sharp, you're a little bit more crispy, a little bit more strong, got a little bit more strength. So it's normal, and just have compassion for yourself on this process. So today I'm talking about 4 reasons why Christianity fails. And I do want to fire off a disclaimer before I say what I'm going to say, because this is not an attack on Christianity. I'm not saying Christianity is bad. Christianity is almost necessary. We need to be able to have something to hold on to before we know any better on the path of the soul. So what I'm going to say here is that hang on to what you know and what you believe to be true, and don't just in one sitting let go of everything, because you need to have some type of foundation before you enter the path of the soul. The path is not for everybody. It's not easy, but the truth is the truth. You can't bypass the truth. So 4 reasons why Christianity fails. First reason is dependence. Christianity creates a dependence, at least traditional, conventional Christianity. You're going to be dependent on Jesus. You're going to be dependent on your beliefs. You're going to be dependent on being a good Christian. These types of things. At first, these are necessary, but if we hang on to them forever, it's going to be a problem, because the soul is lack of dependence. It's actually, there is no need for dependence. There's no need for being dependent on being dependent. Really, the soul is a state of ultimate fulfillment and contentment. There's no hanging on to anything. If we're dependent on, Jesus, going to heaven, and even being dependent on God, no matter how good that thing is we're dependent on, it's not what's infinite. It's not the freedom and liberation of God. Freedom and liberation of God is ultimate contentment, fulfillment. There's no need to hang on to anything. So we need to see that, Christianity often creates a dependence. Dependence on beliefs, of dependence on having something to hang on to, having a support, having a foundation and security. And this is unconscious pleasure that we're trying to reach towards, and we're trying to go away from pain. So the dependence is an attachment on, like I said, going away from pain or going towards pleasure. And attachment is attachment, no matter what you're attached to. It's not necessarily a good thing. We need to see how this separates us from our true nature and who and what we really are. Our true nature is infinite and eternal. There's no need to hang on to anything. It's a state of utter maximum fulfillment. If you're trying to hang on to anything, if you're dependent on anything, if you're attached to anything, it's going to take you away from what's infinite. What's infinite means there's literally nothing to hang on to. The second way Christianity fails is that there's no self-worth. Our value unconsciously is dependent on Jesus, is dependent on something outside of ourselves. It's dependent on, again, being a good Christian, following the rules, listening to the doctrines, and these are all good things. I'm not saying anything bad about this, but we need to see how this can also be a barrier, because it's going to separate us from what's infinite. Our self-worth and our value is unconditional. It doesn't depend on being a good Christian. It doesn't depend on some events happening in time. It doesn't depend on us doing this and that, accomplishing our goals, accomplishing our dreams, one thing after another. Salvation is conditional. It's right here, or it's unconditional, I'm sorry. It's right here, right now, in this exact moment, and nowhere else. So our self-worth and our value do not come from, now if I did my research on this, if you do your research, Christians will tell you that, or at least I was in the Catholic Church, they'll tell you that your value is dependent on the reason, because God made you in his image. That's where your value is. Now that's not self-worth if you look at it closely, because first of all, because God made you in his image, that doesn't equal self-worth. That means God made you in his image. And the unconscious belief in that is that you and God are separate. There's God over there, and then you're over here, and God made you, and it's not the true relationship of oneness. God is infinite oneness. So if you feel separate from God, then your self-worth is dependent on something outside you. That's not self-worth. So the true unconditional self-worth, it has to do with the relationship of oneness. So in Christianity, your self-worth is dependent on believing in Jesus and that he came to die for your sins, etc., etc. That self-worth is dependent on something, on a belief, on Jesus outside of you doing something, on an event in time. All right? That's not self-worth. That's almost the reverse. It's a lack of self-worth. It's trying to get self-worth from outside of you, which is not true self-worth. The third reason Christianity fails is that it creates this belief in separation. As I talked about, without the relationship of oneness, there's always an unconscious belief that God is outside you, and that God needs to be found somewhere outside of you. And there's this reaching, a grasping, a desperate clinging to try to get God, or trying to get salvation, trying to get to heaven. And just by doing that in itself, unconsciously, you're automatically assuming that you and God are separate. It's kind of very subtle, but if you pay attention, you'll always see how the personality perpetuates separateness. And Christianity especially, and I did my research on this, the Christians believe that God and creation are separate. All right? They think, especially, when you look at the Trinity, the soul is not included in the Trinity. They say there's no divinity there. But the truth is, God is oneness, and God is infinite. You can't be separate from what's infinite. There's no possible way, if you look at it logically, if you look at it in objective reality, okay? There's just oneness, and without that oneness, you're going to feel separate. And that's what kind of Christianity perpetuates. You're believing in Jesus, you're believing that you're separate from Jesus. There's you and there's Jesus. There's two different separate things. They can't. In the soul, in the path of the soul, it's unification. It's universality. Is that a word? It's oneness. So that's the third way that Christianity can potentially become a detriment to your own spiritual growth, is that it kind of keeps you with the unconscious belief that you're separate from God. And the fourth reason that Christianity fails is that it's a unconscious psychological belief in time. All right, so the belief is, well, when you die, you get to heaven. So you're waiting in time for that which is timelessness. It can't be done. It's impossible. Okay, it's gonna believing that you can wait till you die to get to heaven is gonna keep you away from heaven. It's gonna take you away from what's timeless. What's timeless is right here, right now, in this exact moment, and nowhere else. You can't wait in time for that which is timeless. So, like, oh, wait till you're dead to go to heaven. This is a huge mistake. Jesus said this is the God of the living, not of the dead. It's the God of the, Abraham and Moses when they were alive. This is for people who are alive, physically alive, right here, right now, in this moment. There's no waiting in time to get to heaven, to get salvation. That's a huge barrier right there. So the 4 ways that Christianity actually fails is by, first is creating dependence. 2 is telling you that you're worthless and you need Jesus to save you. The 3rd is creating this feeling of separation. And the 4th is this unconscious belief in time. Again, I'm not here to just try to destroy Christianity or your beliefs. I encourage you to believe, to hang on to what you believe until you're ready to let go, actually. That's what needs to happen on the path. John Dominique, the Soul Proponent. Peace.